Welcome to my podcast. I am Monica Vanderpool. I am your host, and I'm taking the opportunity to take you through the cycle of narcissistic abuse and to talk a little bit about my book and to actually read some excerpts from my book today. And last episode, I shared with you about the first stage of the cycle. There's four stages to the cycle. And the first stage is the love bombing phase, or some people might call it the idealization phase of the cycle. The second and the third stage of the cycle is devaluation and discarding. And I kind of feel like these two stages kind of go together. The four stages are idealization, which is the love bombing, devaluation, discard, and then the re-engagement, or some people might call it the hoovering. And this is just, it's a manipulative cycle that somebody with narcissistic traits will use to manipulate and exploit other people. The abuser they gain a sense of power and control over the victim's emotions and their thoughts and their behaviors. And what it does is it creates this frequent state of dependency with the victim. So today I want to share parts of my book. I'm actually going to read from my second chapter of the book. It's called Tilted Stage. And the first stage for every relationship's different. And the first stage of this cycle, for me, lasted a little over a year. So the whole love bombing stage, it was a while for me. It lasted a little over a year. And then what happened in the devaluation stage is, first of all, the definition of devalue is to reduce or underestimate the worth or importance. And that's exactly what they do with you. They start to embarrass you, they start to demean you in public. They make you feel unimportant, insignificant. They'll criticize you. They'll verbally attack you. And sometimes it'll start out in just little tiny catty comments that they make. And after coming out of the love bombing phase, these tendencies kind of take you off guard. And what'll happen in the next stage is that once they've kind of pushed you and discarded you away, they'll hoover you back in. And then they'll start love bombing, and then they'll devalue you, they'll push you away, they'll suck you back in, and all of a sudden you've just created this cycle. And what happens with you is that you create this trauma bond with this person, and you would think that you would leave somebody once you notice this, but unless you're journaling and really paying attention to how you're being treated, you might not even know that you're in a narcissistic cycle, which was my case. For 13 years, I didn't realize that I was in this vicious cycle, and I thought it was my fault. I was trying to change. I felt like I was doing something wrong, and I was confused. I was so confused. I created this trauma bond with him, and it wasn't until I got out of the relationship and I started educating myself on these narcissistic traits did I realize that I was in this relationship with a narcissist. So anyway, so the devaluation stage, it's right after the love bombing phase or the idealization phase. And it's when they start to reduce and underestimate your worth and importance. So, I wrote my book, Jokers Dressed Up as Kings, and it's toxic traits in relationships. And, in the book, I share a few of my stories. And then after I share my stories, I kind of explain how this was this trait. So, chapter 2 is called Tilted Stage. I've got 3 short stories of when the devaluation started in my relationship. It's chapter 2, Tilted Stage. A couple of years had passed, and at this time, we were juggling 3 kids, all under the age of 10. And the work Clyde was working with a small construction company, and I still had my promotional company. And we fit in our time together when we could. If the kids were away, we made every point to have our date nights. So here's date night. One of my favorite restaurants was Bonefish Grill. Clyde wasn't a big seafood person, but he liked when I was happy. He would find something on the menu that he could eat anyway. That night was a usual night of dinner and drinks. Upon returning home, an argument developed. I don't remember exactly what we were fighting about, probably something trivial. But what I do remember is that this was the first time I remember him yelling with so much rage and screaming directly in my face. I asked him to stop, but that only fueled his rage. The only thing I knew to do was leave. So I grabbed my keys, hopped in my truck, and before I could put it in reverse, I felt a cold sensation in my lap. Clyde was pouring an entire beer on my lap as I was crying in my truck, trying to get away from him. What the hell just happened? I saw a rage in his eyes that I had never seen before, and it scared me. I drove to mom and dad's house, grabbed a pair of my dad's pajamas so I could take my beer-soaked pants off, went straight to my room, and fell asleep. My mom tried to talk to me. My dad tried to call me. He was out of town working. But all I wanted to do was go to sleep. I was humiliated. Those butterflies still existed, but they weren't the exciting ones. The next day, he apologized. I went to work and tried to forget the night happened. That was a huge red flag, obviously. And you can see like why I would be confused, because that something like that had never happened. And which was probably one reason why I was so quick to forgive him the next day, because I was like, well, this doesn't sound like him. So like I said, I quickly forgave him the next day and we moved on. One of the best parts of our relationship was the relationship I got to build with his family. Love, 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 love all of them. I love the memories of when I met them. We traveled 3 states away and attended family parties, graduations, and weddings. It was the night before a wedding. We left the rehearsal dinner, and Clyde wanted to introduce me to some of his spots and friends. So his parents and brother went home with Clyde's son, and we hit the town. It was a great evening. Time with family, lots of cocktails, and reminiscing with his friends. When the night was over, per our norm, Clyde wanted to have sex. We stayed at his parents' house. Our room was right next to theirs, and that was a line I didn't want to cross. I would be mortified if his mom woke up to us having sex, so I told him no. The next thing I remember was me being on the floor, trying to find the glasses that flew off my face when he pushed me across the bed. My body was shaking in fear as I stood up and pushed past him. The thump from my body hitting the wall woke his brother. He came around the corner, and as I was walking out of the room, and he ran into Clyde face to face. The two of them immediately started yelling and pushing each other. All of the commotion woke their parents, and they came around the corner wondering what was going on. It was then that Clyde turned around and met his stepdad face to face, screaming and pushing against his chest. It all happened so fast and was so intense. I was crying hysterically at this point and jumped in my car to leave. Unaware of where I was going, I sat in my car for a few minutes to calm down. All I could think about was Clyde's child sleeping on the couch. I couldn't leave him, so I stepped back into the house, swooped him up, and carried him into the back bedroom and locked the door. My only thoughts were to keep him safe and away from what was happening in the living room. Clyde's parents called 911, and as soon as the police were called, Clyde ran out of the house. We locked the doors and got ourselves together. The rage that I saw was like nothing I had ever seen before. It was like he saw red, and nothing on this earth could calm him down. I tried to sleep that night, but didn't have much success. About an hour after the incident, Clyde came knocking on the window for me to let him in, but I wouldn't. I almost drove home that night, but I didn't. I knew it meant so much to the bride for him to be there. The next morning, he came back to his parents' house. I looked him in the eyes and said, I know you didn't do it on purpose. I forgive you. Now let's go to the wedding and have a great time. And we did just that. We had an absolute blast. We danced for the first time that night, and he was an absolute gentleman. Later, he would discover that our son was conceived that night, making that wedding one that I would never forget for many reasons. Again, what the hell happened? And obviously, that's another red flag. And, after the first, like that first story, I forgave him the next day. And again, he hoovered me back in, and we were fine. You know, we went to this wedding, and that happened that night. And then the next day at the wedding, again, that was him hoovering me back in. So then I'll continue. This is my last story, just as examples of after that wedding, the love bombing and the idealization stage came back into play. And then this happened. When I look back on our 13 years together, several of my memories are clouded by the sounds of yelling. The yells would escalate quickly, and in several instances would end with Clyde directly in my face. He flew into these blind rages. My reaction was always to shut down. I knew I could never reason with him, calm him down, or get away from him. So many times I would beg him, please stop, please stop, please stop. He never would. So then I stayed silent and closed my eyes, which made him even angrier. I remember times when I would pull the covers over my head and he would rip them off me. He wanted to make sure I was listening to him and even wanted me to look him in the face. The times when he left me there in the fetal position with no covers made me feel like I was nothing. I then started to run into the bathroom and lock the door to get away from him. He always knew how to unlock the door. He would come to the bathroom and close the door behind him, trapping me in. It was awful. One of the worst moments was when he ripped a trophy wife shirt right off me on our wedding night while screaming in my face. His rage was so intense, he had the strength to tear my shirt straight down the middle with his bare hands. We were on a cruise at the time, and I had nowhere to go. I ended up sleeping in my brother's room that night. His intimidation was so intense. On several occasions, I had to call 911. It was the only thing that would make him stop. Every time he left before the police arrived. The short time that the officers stood at my door to check on me were the only moments I felt safe when Clyde was in that rage. There was a time when I had to look at our son and ask him to call 911 because Clyde had snatched my phone out of my hand. He was 8 years old at the time. It was heart-wrenching. So many red flags. And then after that, I explain in my book what devaluation is, the reduction or underestimation of the worth or importance of something. A behavior exhibited by individuals with NPD, which is a narcissistic disorder, where they belittle or dismiss others in order to maintain their own sense of superiority and self-importance. While idealization places a person, place, or thing on a pedestal, devaluation refers to the act of assigning exaggerated negative qualities while disregarding the good. During devaluation, flaws, weaknesses, and negative traits take center stage, and positive qualities are completely ignored. So, like I said, I feel like devaluation and discard, those two phases kind of go together because that basically happens right after the discard phase. And, in some cases like mine, rage comes into play, which just takes it to a completely another level. And anyone going through that, my heart goes out to you. I would not wish that on my worst enemy. And, one thing that saved me was journaling, writing things down, because it's confusing. It confuses you. It just puts you in this, you feel crazy. So I would journal and I would go back and I would start seeing these patterns. And I knew a long time ago that I should have left, but I never did. I created this trauma bond with him, which we'll talk about that in another episode. But That is basically phase 2 and 3, devaluation and discarding.